Eric did a really good job putting together this display up here. We figured it would be helpful to understand how a water system works in an RV before we talk about winterizing, because we think it'll make a little bit more sense if we know why we need to winterize. So basically you have a few components that are going to be the same in just about any RV. Starting off with your freshwater tank. This is where your fresh water gets stored if you're not hooked up to city water, right? So you've got a fill on the outside of your camper that you fill up with the water, it goes into the water tank. There's a suction line from that water tank that goes up to your water pump. So when you're running off your freshwater tank, the freshwater pump pressurizes that water and sends it off to all your faucets and your water heater, your shower, your toilet, and all of that. Beyond the water pump is your city water connection. So if you're hooked up to water at a campground, you're hooked up to the city water connection here. The city water actually comes into the same lines that the pump uses when it pressurizes the water. There's actually a check valve in the pump that prevents that water from coming back in and filling up your water tank. Then it goes on to your water heaters and your faucets and everything. So with winterizing, there are a couple of trains of thought with winterizing. We hear a lot, people ask, well, they make these little fittings that go into my city water connection that I can use a tire chuck on an air compressor and blow the lines out. You know, isn't that good enough? I mean, I'm getting all the water out of my lines, right? Well, if we think about where this thing is in the process, you can blow air through your lines, but it's going to miss the water pump. No matter what you do, that check valve is going to keep the air from blowing the water out of the impeller and everything in the water pump, the valves. So one of the most common things that happens when folks only blow their lines out is a frozen water pump. They fire up their water pump the next spring and water goes everywhere. These are okay to blow the lines out before you winterize it properly, but don't just do the compressed air, because you'll end up with a frozen water pump. If you don't, you're lucky. Don't gamble with it. It's definitely not worth it. So to properly winterize, we need to get antifreeze through the lines in the camper. And there are a couple of ways to do that, a couple of different water pumps. Your first step is going to be to drain your freshwater tank. There should be a plug or a valve underneath your camper, normally near where the fill is, to drain the water out of your freshwater tank. The other thing you're going to do on the outside of your camper, on your water heater, is take the plug out. There'll be a plastic plug or a metal plug that has an anode rod on it. You want to take that out and drain your water heater. Get all the water out of it. Next, on your water heater, there's going to be a bypass. Anything that you've bought from us, especially if it's a new trailer, will have some type of bypass on the water heater. And what that does, instead of allowing the cold water to go into the water heater, fill up the tank, and come out of the hot lines, a bypass essentially takes the tank out of the equation. It bypasses the tank. It lets the water come through the cold, straight through the hot, and back out to the taps. There are 3 different kinds of bypasses on water heaters. And they all work the same, but they look a little bit different. Over here is a single valve bypass, and that's used on Keystone, is that right? A lot of Keystone trailers have a single valve bypass. So inside your trailer, opposite of where your water heater door is outside, normally underneath a cabinet or behind a panel, you take that off, you'll see the back of your water heater and then your hot and cold lines. So with the bypass, you just turn your bypass to the bypass position, opposite of where it was when it worked, and that'll bypass your water heater tank. Some other campers have a 2-valve bypass. Well, there's a valve on the hot line and a valve on the cold line. Same thing there, just turn both of those valves to the bypass position. And on these, a lot of times it'll say open or bypass when you turn it, so you'll know which way is which. The other example is a 3-valve bypass, and we've got that in the little camper down here. It's the same idea, except it adds a valve on the bypass itself. So top, bottom, and a bypass valve. So once the water heater is bypassed, then we can talk about getting antifreeze through the system and properly winterizing the camper. And that's going to depend a little bit on the type of water pump that you have. Your water pump generally is going to be, again, underneath a cabinet somewhere, normally in the kitchen, maybe in the bathroom. If you can't find your water pump, turn it on and listen for it, because normally you hear the water pump down there running, and you can normally kind of pinpoint where it's at, take that panel off to be able to find it and get to it. If you don't have a bypass on it, you're just going to have a line coming in and a line coming out, no valves or extra hoses or anything. But again, most everything that comes out of here has some type of a bypass kit on it, or a winterizing kit on it. Probably the most common one adds a valve in between the freshwater tank and the pump, and it has a short length of extra hose with it. So what that does, once you get ready to winterize, when you turn the valve facing this hose here, this has made the suction line of the pump instead of the tank. So then, use your RV antifreeze. The hose goes down in the antifreeze. Turn your pump on, and it's going to start sucking that antifreeze from the jug. And you want to start at the furthest faucet from your water pump and open up the hot water until it turns to pink antifreeze. Turn that one off, turn the cold water on, let it run until it turns to pink antifreeze, and then go to each faucet in the camper. Don't forget your shower head, outside showers. The toilet is a big one. That little valve on the toilet doesn't take much at all to freeze those and bust those. So make sure every faucet outside, kitchens, water points, everywhere. Also, it's a good idea where this city water hookup is on the outside of your camper. Normally there's a length of hose between your water lines and that. If you pull the little screen and washer out of that, there's a little check valve in this. Stand to the side when you do this, but push in on that check valve and let that water flow out until it's antifreeze also. That way you don't have a little bit of water stuck in that line too. You may have a flow jet pump. Get this out of the way here. So if you have a flow jet pump in your camper, a lot of these won't have a winterizing kit on them because they have real easy to remove fittings. There's a little deal on here you pull up, and the fittings actually pop right out of the water pump. So you would have this fitting coming from your fresh water tank. You would pop that out. Get another fitting with a small length of hose. Pop that in its place, and then this will drop down into your antifreeze. So the flow jets are real easy because they've got those quick connect fittings on them that literally just pop in and out. We have seen some other setups in campers recently where they have kind of a 2-valve system for the winterizing kit for the suction line, where you have a line coming from your tank that has a valve on it, and you've got your extra length of suction hose for your antifreeze jug that also has a valve on it. So in that case, you're going to shut the one off to the tank, open up the one to the length of hose to be able to suck out your antifreeze with. So there's a few different ways of doing it, but they're all the same kind of idea. We're shutting the tank off and we're making our antifreeze jug the water tank, basically. It is, I guess, important to remember when we talk about antifreeze for winterizing that we're talking about RV antifreeze and not car antifreeze. You know, the type of stuff, the glycol-based stuff you use in your car is toxic, and we don't want to have that in our water lines. RV antifreeze normally is alcohol-based, so it's non-toxic. So always use a good, you know, pink RV antifreeze. I think it comes in, what, 2.5 gallon?
Well, almost out of that this year.
Are you?
If we've ever tried it. So many people want to try it before we didn't know how they were going to do. So that's something we'll bring back next year. I don't think we can get it again this year.
Okay, we've got the gallon jugs, though. Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, yeah. So yeah, that brings up another point. It should take 2.5 gallons of antifreeze to do your whole camper, generally speaking. So that's why like he was talking, we had the one container that would normally have enough to do a camper. Yeah, anything that's left over, pour down the traps in your drains to make sure that you don't have any water stuck in the traps there to freeze and bust any plumbing lines in your drains. You know, obviously make sure your gray tanks and your black tanks are empty. You don't want water sitting in those over the winter time and possibly freezing up either. It's also a good time, you know, to think about, you know, giving your camper one last check over. Because I would say for most of us, including me, this is the longest time that my camper is going to sit that I probably won't be in it for a while. So if there are any issues, I don't want to go out there in the spring to get ready for camping and I've got, you know, a leak in my roof that's been going all winter long or anything like that. So it's a good idea to give your camper one last look over, you know, before you put it to bed for the winter, before you put the cover on it or before you leave it at the storage place or whatever. Get up on the roof, check all of the seals, you know, the Dicor sealant that goes around the seams front and back, around all of your vents, plumbing vents, everything on top of the camper. You know, make sure you check that, touch up any areas that even look remotely questionable, you know, so you don't have a surprise in the springtime. Same thing around, you know, windows and baggage doors and your clearance lights and all that. Any of the silicone sealant or Sikacil or any of that that looks remotely questionable, make sure to hit that, you know, at that time also, because the worst thing that can happen is you get excited to go camping in, you know, February or March and you've got a problem that you got to bring it down here and you're going to lose the first part of your camping trip, you know, getting repairs done. So make sure to check your seals, your seams. If you have a motor home or a fifth wheel or something that has a generator on it, make sure you think about the fuel that's in that unit also. If you've got a motorhome or something with a generator, you know, make sure you use some type of fuel stabilizer in the gas tank. You know, run the engine, run the generator for a while to get that into the system so that you don't end up with a gummed up carburetor in a generator or fuel injectors or something. You know, make sure your fuel system's taken care of. Mice love campers in the wintertime. So, you know, go through your cabinets, make sure you don't have any food items or anything that mice or critters are going to enjoy over the wintertime if they get into your camper. We've got this stuff back in the parts department that's a rodent repellent. It's all natural, and people swear by this stuff, that you put it in your camper in a few places, and apparently the smell of it, which isn't terrible, but apparently the mice don't like it. Keeps them from, you know, getting into your camper and making nests, because that can cause all sorts of issues too, chewing up wires or plumbing or whatever. So make sure you do something to keep mice out of it, especially if you live in an area where that's a problem. What else am I forgetting, Matt?
With all the campers coming with more household style alternatives, each appliance is going to have a different way to winterize ice cream. So you need to find a model number and all that. Manual, if you don't have one, for that appliance to figure out how to make it freezer, how to flush the water out of there. Not only that, but the washing machine, you should have one that's like the whole special way for ice cream.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, don't forget those like I just did. Yes.
You mentioned compressed air. It's a hot way to stop it. Where you got to use compressed air, wherever you go. What's the recommendation? Just try to just say antifreeze without blowing something down the next.
Here's my personal thought on it, because it is a hotly contested thing, and everybody's got their own opinion. My opinion is, if you are sucking antifreeze through those lines, there's not going to be any water left when you get done. So, to me, blowing the lines out first, I don't know that you really need to do that. The water that comes out of those lines when you blow them out is still going to go down the drain just like it does if the antifreeze goes down with it. So I think in a lot of cases it might be a step that you don't need to take. You know, especially since it's not going to get the pump. You know, it's not going to get the internals of that. You know, doing the antifreeze, as long as you make sure you get every faucet, every valve, then I really don't think you need to do that. Any other thought on that, Matt?
No, I mean, if you're going to do that solely, you're always taking the risk for residual stuff in there, only way to 100% do it.
Right. Yeah, the thing that I hear a lot with folks that have blown their lines out is they'll blow them out and they're sure that they've got every bit of water out of the system. There's nothing coming out of those faucets but air. Well, after they stop blowing that air through, all that residual water is flowing down those lines and dripping down those lines into a low spot, you know, somewhere in a wall, and collecting in a corner somewhere, and then over the wintertime it freezes, it busts, and it's behind a cabinet, and in the springtime they hook water up and they've got water coming out everywhere. So yeah, the antifreeze, 100%. Always use the antifreeze, and if you do that, I think you have a chance, a far less chance of having issues than with the air. And like I say, doing it right, the air just really isn't doing much anyway. One point that I guess I forgot to mention is low point drains on your camper. Most campers nowadays have generally it's a blue pipe sticking out of the bottom of the camper with a cap on it or a valve, and a red one next to it sticking down with a valve on it or a cap. Those are low point drains. That's theoretically the lowest point in all the plumbing in your camper. So that's another place that you want to drain out too, you know, and right, let antifreeze run through it. So yeah, most campers will have those nowadays. Some of the older ones do as well, and it's normally in a water line, like near the water heater with a valve that pulls up. If it's the furthest area away from where your pump is, do it first. You know, you always want to start the furthest away and move closer to the pump. So normally, you know, if your pump is in the kitchen, underneath the kitchen cabinet, the kitchen sink's going to be the last one you do. So start furthest place, work your way in.
One thing that we've seen is probably 30% of the people that blow out the airline come by and spoil the stuff. The problem with that this year is it's a little bit harder to come by. The genetic spoil part is taking 4 to 6 weeks to get in. And they freeze probably 30% of the price. So you're paying $50, $60 for a water valve for a toilet.
Yeah, those toilet valves are huge. I know they see it a lot more in the parts and service department than we do, but in the springtime, when we're having, when folks are buying new campers for the season and they're trading in their old ones, probably the number one thing that I see that's wrong with the trade-in when it comes in is the toilet valve's frozen. You know, they didn't winterize their camper properly or get the antifreeze through, or they forgot about the toilet. So yeah, that's a huge thing. Yes, sir. What's the thought on that, Matt? No? Yeah, you'll have some antifreeze in the tank. Yeah, the thing I would worry about with the chemical, since a lot of them are water-based, would be that sitting down against your dump valve all winter long and maybe freezing that up or causing issues with the blade valve that's in there, freeze it up. So, yeah, I don't leave any in mine over the winter. Just whatever antifreeze ends up down the drains from pouring it in the traps. Any other questions? Inline filters, those come out, correct?
There's a lot of inline filters, especially if you have a canister filter, will come with a disc to basically bypass that container. Spin that off, put the disc inside the container, screw it back on, and it basically just goes straight to the outlet. Other ones have quarter-inch quick connect or quick connect line. You can put the between the two to bypass the filter. But yeah, you don't want to run antifreeze through the filter. The other thing is a lot of them do is the antifreeze actually turns quick. So you don't even know when you got antifreeze through your faucet. It filters out the color. That's happened several times. Got people shopping, but a new person who's not getting antifreeze through their water. How you make water and how it's got. So that's what's that? I don't think I have a box. If not, we're going to get you one. We'll just spin the container back on. And it takes, it's going to take extra 2 quarts of antifreeze or something to fill that up before it comes back out. One quick question while we're getting water to this over. You guys drain your water heaters every time you investigate? If not, you should. You guys ever smell that sulfur gas smell with that's coming from your water? It's also anaerobic bacteria that the antifreeze, the aluminum, the steel, and the water heater, and the lactose. So you're going to be waiting for more than 3 or 4 days. Right after you plug out and put that in the shop. It's a real big thing. People constantly think it's coming from the water.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess the one other thing that I can think of to talk about for winter storage would be your batteries in your campers. Generally speaking, they say a charged battery won't freeze, you know, but the worst thing we can do for a travel trailer or a fifth wheel is leave the camper plugged in all winter long, charging that battery up, because in your camper, most of your converters don't actually shut off the charge when that battery's charged up. It'll drop it down, but it's always going to be charging, and you don't want to overcharge your battery because that'll, boil out all the electrolyte, ruin the battery. So the recommended thing to do with your batteries would be, if you have a garage or somewhere where you can bring it, take the battery out of your camper, bring it inside to the garage, and put, a battery maintainer on it. Something like a float charger that will keep it topped up, but shut off when it's full, and just keep it, maintained all winter long. That way in the spring, when you go to put it back on the camper, you've got a battery that works, that's charged up, that's ready to go. If that battery sits out there on your camper outside dead all winter long, the chances of it taking a charge and working like it should in the spring are very, very slim. And just like everything else this past year or so, the price of batteries has gone up too. So, you know, that little extra care that you spend on it right now, you know, taking that battery out and putting that. So, take care of your batteries as well.
Other thing is you're gonna leave them plug in, check that water off. Big thing I would say is it will boil out once they're charging constantly. And then tell sign that there's a problem with freezing or overcharging is going to be the batteries that explode and start falling. It's not going to be a perfectly straight case. If it's doing that, chances are it's on its last one. The contacts are lead in there. They're going to make contact with each other.
Any other questions?
I haven't, I just bought a trailer the first time I ever had a trailer. In 2016, that Michael Flight said, and it has an outside place to put your antifreeze in. So I guess that situation, you get your bypass and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Just leave your jug outside and turn your pump on, stuff right into that.
Mm-hmm. His question was, or his comment was, his camper has a winterizing port on the outside, and you'll see that like a lot on Cougars and Montanas and some of your upper end brands, that they'll have a docking center outside, like maybe in a storage compartment where your water hooks up, where your dump valves are, and a lot of those will have a winterizing valve in there that says normal or winterize, and a bypass valve for your water heater. And so yeah, with those, if that's what you have, turn them both to winterize. There'll be a port to hook up a short piece of hose to that goes in your jug, and it's just a whole lot easier.
That's what I thought, and then I turned my pump on, see my city water hook up right next to it. So I'll probably have to go in, fill up all the lines, then it'll come back. And where my filter's right there, like you said, take the filter out and fill that up and then come up. And like you said, try to take that little screen off, make sure the water comes all the way up to that checkout.
Right. Yeah, you open up all your valves inside. Yeah, take the screen out of your city water fill.
Make sure that antifreeze comes all the way up to
Absolutely.
that. I'm glad you mentioned that, so that it may not let the antifreeze come all the way up to it.
Right. Yeah, and with those type of systems too, you still need to make sure you go in, open up all your faucets, just like you normally do. Right. Yeah, it's all outside right there in that docking station. So yeah, that makes it a lot more convenient to do it that way. You don't have to hunt any of this stuff down.
Which is a little bit confusing because it looks like you're still going through the city water, but you're not. That port is plumbed in order to take care of the pump. Yeah. If you use a hand pump on the outside going through that city water, which people do all the time when we sell those pumps, but it never goes back through the water pump because the building checks out. So if you go through that outside port, you're not really getting the pump taken care of. But on yours, because the way it's plumbed, it's designed to do that, so that's taken care of.
Right. Yes, sir.
I think this will take care of the black tank flush. I know it's got a separate intake on the outside.
Black tank. Right.
None of your black flush ports have a check valve, so it's going to free flow no matter what you do. So there'll be no issue there at all.
Yeah, shouldn't be any water left in your black tank flush line.
Any chance the condensation lines on the air conditioners might have some water left in them?
Never seen it be an issue.
Yeah, I haven't seen that either. Because normally those condensation lines on the AC, I mean, it just drains right out of the side of the case, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's never one time been an issue.
All right.
That
That you've seen.
most of the time we get diagnosed fractures and fluid in big ways. So I mean, if it is an issue, it's really hard to pinpoint because the design of it is, they do fracture often.
Mm-hmm. He was asking about the anodes on the water heater. And that's this. on your, yeah, it's this one here. If your water heater has a metal drain plug on it, that's because it has this type of an anode rod drain combination. And it's going to be on the outside, and normally you'll have a panel on it. But when you pull that out, this is a pretty normal anode rod. It looks kind of nasty, but these are designed to get eaten away instead of the metal tank of your water heater. And they say, what, 25%? So when the anode rod gets eaten down to its bare little wire, and there's only about 25% of it left, that's when they say it's time to replace it. Most of the time when you pull them out, even if you bought your camper brand new in the spring and used it all summer long, when you pull the anode rod out for the first time, it could look pretty nasty. And that just means that it's doing its job. You know, if this is getting eaten away, then the impurities in the water are attacking this and not your tank. So when it gets down to about a quarter, throw this away and come pick up a new one. Real important to keep that in good shape. Any other questions? Still have to winterize the lines. The question was, what if my camper is prepped for a washer and dryer, but I don't have one? There's still going to be water in the hot and cold lines for that. So, you know, just take a bucket or what have you in there and turn each of those on until antifreeze comes through, and then you can use that antifreeze to go down, you know, the traps and the drains. But yeah, so washer dryer prep, even if you don't have one, you still have to make sure that gets antifreeze through it too.
One thing I just thought of, if you're going to blow out your line, before we ever hook up air to anything, have one valve on. So you can pull it outside and start still and furthest away from the pump or the entry, but never pressurize it without one valve. A lot of guys will have an 120-pound air pressure, and most of your lines are designed for 65 or less.
Anybody else? All right. Well, we appreciate everybody coming out. Like I say, next time Eric will be back, so it'll be a whole lot more fun. But I appreciate you guys putting up with me and putting up with Matt. He's way more knowledgeable than I am. If anybody has any other questions or anything afterwards, or wants to come up and look at any of this stuff, feel free to. We would just ask that everybody maintain their social distancing and all of that. We're trying our best with the seminars this year, you know, by offering the live streaming option and limiting the in-person attendance, you know, to kind of do our part with everything that's going on. So we just ask everybody to, you know, respect that too, and that way we can continue to do this for the rest of the seminar season. So, but thanks to everybody for coming out, and like I said, we'll be around here for a few more minutes if anybody has any more questions.